Osmia.
Okay, and I'll go ahead and just jump right, share my screen, and we'll use Mike's key. A lot of people have familiarity with the Discover Life features, and the nice thing is that this is Mike's showing us several new different paths to answers. So this is one of the nice things about having Mike here, and a new set of keys of sorry, I'm doing two things at once. I need to share. And I think, are we sharing now? Do you guys see the key online?
We got it.
Yep.
Okay, all right, good. Yeah, so Mike's dichotomous keys are a really nice pairing of the Discover Life ones because there's different paths to the same answers, hopefully, and that they emphasize different features. So last time, in which we lost Mike after the beginning, we got to Droege and cerulescens and in talking about them. And so again, let me know if things are not showing up here. We're now on the remainder of the key here, where we're going to get into pumila and collinsiae and atriventris and these things that tend to be trickier for people. So the first one is not very tricky as long as you are spending your time on the sternites, because from my impression is from above, inspergens looks like everybody else, and you could make too quick of an assumption about some of these Osmia. Inspergens is a good example, but due diligence of pretty much every male Osmia is to turn it over and inspect the sternites and make sure that, because almost a good chunk of the conformations are down there in the sternite region. Mike, would you kind of agree with that, or what do you think?
Oh, totally, yeah. Especially this group that you're in today. I mean, every single one of them. You really need to look at the sternites, and sometimes genitalia even.
Yeah. So in regard to genitalia, again, people know that we never pull genitalia, but if one were to do your due diligence and pull genitalia, do pretty much all of them have a different present their genitalia differently, or do you have a lot that are largely the same?
Most of them, yeah. But atriventris and pumila and proxima, you almost need to compare because they're very, in terms of describing them without figures, it's tough. So there are subtle differences, and some that are, if we get to subarctica and interbana, they're very distinct differences.
Good. All right, so I'm going to jump to I've got inspergens docked up here, and it's a good specimen to just go through what's going on the sternite, so in a little more detail than we've done in the past. So I will make this full screen. Let's see, Alt, what is that? Alt Control Shift F for some reason. So here we have the same number, but they're very different than a lot of other groups, and it takes a little while to get oriented. So here's S1, the first sternite, and I would say it's almost never in play in terms of ID stuff, but
I agree.
Right there. And then after that, though, almost all of them are in play quite a bit, and it pays to look at them. But we'll also talk about a couple problems. So here's S2, and we're talking inspergens. And in Mike's key, he's going to focus on S4, which is over here. But here's S2. Now, S3 in most of the specimens you're going to see, unless you pull the abdomen, which Mike will talk about here in a second, to expose S3. S3 is going to be largely hidden. It's variable because sometimes they just naturally their abdomen loosens up and the sternites and the tergites too would be pulled out. But here's S3. There's just the corners there and there. The rest of S3 is under S2. And so a lot of the times and they have very interesting characters. But right now, I can't tell you anything about the interesting character, which are the hair patterns in so S3 is going to dip down like this and then back up like this. And this area hidden by S2 will have a series of long hairs, sometimes short hairs. And that pattern sometimes is very revealing, the width of this emargination, this concave area, what the hairs do, but most of the time, can't see it. And then S4 is almost always visible, and there's almost always, here's the genitalia poking up. We can't see it, but we will show this. S4, we have looked already at the rim of S4, looking for that split rim, or not. And then the hair pattern hidden here by the genitalia, which is out of focus, at the end of S4 is not used a whole lot in guides because sometimes the differences are subtle. But when you're trying to puzzle out, is this species different from that species? This area here, again, largely hidden by the genitalia, but we'll show this in several cases, is often rich in subtle characters that when you're doing comparisons among your specimens is really useful in just saying, like, coming to conclusions about, am I looking at the same thing or I'm looking at something different? So Mike, do you have more to add there about the general sternite issues, and maybe talk about, I believe you pull the abdomen a bit to open it up.
Yeah, S2, S3, and S4 are all really extremely important and different between all the species, and sometimes in subtle ways, but mostly pretty easy to recognize if you can see them. And so what I usually do is, if I have fresh specimens or specimens that are been relaxed and are pliable, I do whatever I can to expose all those sternites and the genitalia. When specimens are fresh or have not been in alcohol for very long, you can do that. But specimens that have been in alcohol for a while, they just become very rigid. And often when you try to pull things or stretch the abdomen, boom, it goes flying across the room or something. And so that's just the way it is. But sometimes you can just get a little peek. Sometimes you can take a pin and just very, very gently lift up S2 and see enough of S3, which is hidden by S2, to get a pretty good idea of what it isn't. Because sometimes the hair patterns, like Sam said, on S3 are distinctive, and sometimes you only need to see a little bit of it to know which one it might be.
Yeah. So Mike, this might be a good place to talk about relaxing specimens so let's say you do have either a dry one or something that's been in alcohol forever and, maybe fairly valuable or, of great question. What's your approach to taking these rigid specimens and being able to pull genitalia? Or is it too late completely?
No, I don't think it's too late. You always said, if they've been in alcohol, you just have to be careful. And so what I have a system I've developed over the years where just a basic Tupperware container, and in it some paper towels. And the key is there's this substance called chlorocreosol, which BioQuip used to sell. Now I don't know where to get it now, but I've got about 50 million. I got a big supply of it, and I'd be happy to share it with anybody. But there are other ways to go. Anyway, so what you want is something that impedes and restricts microbial growth. Because if you put a specimen in a humidor, that is one of these Tupperware containers with moist paper towels and nothing else, it won't be long before it's probably going to have some fungi on it and just not look very good. And you don't want to ruin it. So something that inhibits microbial and fungal growth is good. I used to use battery acid in the early days.
That seems extreme.
Well, it was convenient and it worked, but you can't get it. You can't even get inside a battery anymore. Phenol, if you have access to phenol, that will help impede microbial growth. And the specimens don't need to be in very long. The smaller they are, the briefer, the less amount of time it takes to rehydrate them. So if I put, let's say, a typical male Osmia in a humidor, in 24 hours, I will check it and see if the antennae are pliable, legs are pliable, then I think, okay. Then I'll pick it up. If it's on a pin or if it's not on a pin, I put it between my thumb and forefinger, upside down, just like you see on the screen, and then very carefully under the scope, start to take a pin, number 2, for example, and start trying to see what I can do. And you'll know pretty quickly if it's hopeless or if there's a chance.
Yep.
Mike,
and so it also, okay, go ahead.
Can you repeat what creosol you were using?
Yeah, chlorocreosol.
Chlorocreosol, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a sugary, dry powder type thing. And what BioQuip used to sell would last 20 people all their lifetimes. I mean, you don't need much. You just need a teaspoonful wrapped up in a paper towel so it doesn't spill out. And I've been using the same ones for 20 years or more. So, but again, if we can't get chlorocreosol, there are other chemical substances that can work. I've never tried this, but I was told mouthwash will work. I don't know if that's true.
I don't know. I'll give you a story.
That's like a very Elad answer to that.
Yeah. Which brand? But Listerine probably. So I'll tell you a story that shows how tough they are, and this may work too. I just don't know because that wasn't my goal. So we do things to make specimens, clean them up that are really filthy if we want to take a photograph of them. So one of the ways we do that is we boil water, like in a crock pot or whatever those Instapot kind of thing, and pour it into like a centrifuge tube. And then I just have the specimen on a pin and I just drop it right in. So no preliminaries or anything, just drop the whole thing in there. And we're adding soap and then shaking it and then taking it back out. And then we spin off the water a little bit and drop it into acetone. This is again for our purposes, right, so that we can dry it really well and get the hair to pop back up. But I wonder if the genitalia would also at the same time become available in the same way that you're talking about, but in this much more, let's say, radically, it would be fast if it worked, but I don't know if it would.
No, I think you're right, Sam. One of the old time ways is boil water in a tea kettle and hold the specimen in the steam. I've never tried that, but I've seen it written in older texts.
Yeah.
So that's the same, pretty much similar to what you're saying. But yeah, I think putting it in boiling water, or hot. I mean, not boiling, but super hot. Yeah, I think I'm going to try that.
Yeah. So that might be homework for everybody. It took me a while to kind of like, why not? We used expendable specimens, and none of them ever fell apart or anything. So we didn't have that for us there was still hair issues. Like it didn't get rid of some of the I don't know, I will call it the inner goop that comes out of specimens from where the pin is, or from a spiracle or regurgitant, I'm not even sure, and then just essentially permanently mats down the specimen hairs, which is something that I wanted to get rid of. Now, I've recently learned of some other techniques, but by photographers for doing these kinds of things, and I'll report back. But it seems like the notion of literally dropping them into you know, water that had just been boiling might be a thing. And it's also then something that you can do could be something that you could do relatively quickly rather than, you know, having to do this whole setup.
Yep.
Like we want things now, right? So that might work. And also then you're done, right? Instead of like you're often, and when you're doing identifications, you're often balancing a whole bunch of things and then you move on to something else. And now you've got these specimens, you forgot what they were doing, and you can keep track of the tags and everything else a lot better. So anyway, homework
before you wander too far off. Joel wants to know, does the relative humidity matter when rehumidifying insects?
Well, yeah. When you put that that Tupperware container together with the paper towels that are moist, I assume it's 100% relative humidity inside there. But it's a very good question because you don't want to pour so much water in that Tupperware container that it's sloshing around. And that's what you need to. It takes some experience. You don't want so much water that when you pull the specimen out, it's just like a big glob full of water. So there's some trial and error involved there, but just enough water, enough moisture in the Tupperware container to make the paper towels moist.
Yeah, and you can use acetone. Like if you did get the soak the specimen somehow, one way or the other, you can just drop them into acetone. It just takes a second, right? You just drop them in, and then the thing about acetone is it's got a very high flash point, way more than alcohol. It's relatively non-toxic. My read is that it's very similar to alcohol. Like you're not going to want to drink it, but it's not. It's the kind of thing you can handle pretty easily. And then I use blow dryers, or I literally just blow on it, and I can resurrect it back up. And if you want to do something more, you can use tiny little artist brushes to. This is what we're doing, right? We're trying to make it look beautiful versus ID level is something else. So anyway, this is there's more to learn here, but and for the person who's doing taxonomy and really needs to know what I absolutely am struggling and looking at specimens and trying to determine if they're different or the same, or maybe it's a new species. I mean, you're going to have to do these kinds of things. ID work, it's just a matter of scale. Like for us, it's bees per minute, and we mostly have other avenues to ID, which we'll be talking about if we ever get to it, that lead us to confidence in our answer. But the genitalia, and in this case S3 here hidden, and being able to pull those out, super useful. And often, like Collides, I was just talking to other people, S7 in Collides is great, but you have to basically dissect them to do the same kind of thing. So anyway, inspergens. So Mike, I'm going to change it. Mike, in his key here, talks about how the fact that they're S4, and again, the genitalia are blocking, but there's an emargination. So mostly S4 in most species is some kind of projecting convex shape. And S4, I'll change this in a second, has a very clear emargination or concave area in the center, making these two areas here lobes. But you can also see S2 also, which is unusual and perhaps as unique as having that emargination in S4, also has a small emargination there at the tip. It might be what Distincta maybe has something similar, but these are useful things. I'm going to change this now and tilt it further back so that we can see the emargination better. And also just to point out that the hairs on S4 in this species, I think are unusually unusual. Maybe not anything you're going to put in a guide, but they're very straight. And usually the hairs in these areas, there's a leg in the way. Let me move this a little bit. Maybe I can move it on here. Yeah, there we go. Normally, the hairs have some sort of S shape or hook, shepherd's croft shape at the end. Yeah, I've never used that, to ID inspergens, but it's, it's noticeable. And if you were doing comparisons, it would be something you would want to look at. Okay, what the heck I think that's S2 there, and then this is S4. Yeah, here we go. It's not great. This leg is a bit in the way, but normally this is S4 right here. So normally S4 would go out and it would be completely concave, but here you can see it actually dips in here, and there's a bit of a bump out, a lobe on either side. Anything more, and if we look from the side, which I'm not going to bother to do because we've been yapping too much already, these hairs in this area, this is the area where specialized hairs occur. They're all stick straight and white. Anything else to add there, Mike?
I would say that, that S shape of S4 is unique to that species. I mean, that's all you need.
Yeah.
There are other interesting characters, but that's usually easy to see, and you don't have to pull anything out. It's usually, there it is.
Right. Does distincta, or am I thinking of females? No. It seems like another species has some concave going on there, or maybe.
Well, there's one where it's straight, Virga, which maybe we'll get to, is straight. So the shape of the apical margin of S4 is pretty valuable in a lot of species.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's real convex, sometimes it's like what you're seeing here, other times it's barely convex, so it becomes pretty useful.
Yeah, and sometimes it'll have like a shoulder and then rise up and then down like that too. So again, just these comparisons among things. Oh, hang on for 1 sec. It's my head of the maintenance department. Yes? Oh, you're just watching. Okay. All right. We would love to have the cupola moved.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, he's just fascinated by genitalia. So
nice.
What we're looking at?
I've got my track letter. It's a little bit stuck right now, so when I get it unstuck, I'll put forks on and come up and get that out of there.
Okay, that would be awesome, because we have the Boone and Crockett Club is coming on Saturday with Tom, and he would love that. See that. I've got people I need to talk to.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
So one last thing about inspergens is it's very, very widespread. A lot of these osmias we're going to be talking about are either northern or eastern or southern, but inspergens, I've seen specimens from Alabama, Kansas, northern Michigan, Maine. So it's a really widespread species, and doesn't appear to be a specialist on any particular genus of plants.
And but I would say I would agree with that, and also just tends not to be very common. Like I don't see piles like I often do for the other groups. It seems like here's one or two, and a little bit more common to the north from what I've seen in, like it's more common in New England, but yeah, we get them right here at the research center. All right, so we're back to here, and we talked about inspergens and its contra signs. If we go here, and we've got a split, so S4 with a narrow hairless zone, and then S4 with numerous hairs and bristles throughout. And so we'll the latter is where we were talking about these specialized hairs being present. When you talk about a narrow hairless zone, you're talking about that slot. Well, I think of it as a slot. Is that right, Mike?
That's right. Yeah. And this is a real tricky couplet because you really need some magnification and some patience and move the specimen around to see this, because like Sam said, there are a lot of hairs there. And if you don't look at it at the right angle, it looks like the hairs just completely cover S4. But if you get the right perspective, you will see this very narrow slot that Sam called it, that the hairs go over the top of it like a canopy, but there aren't any hairs in it. And there are a couple, yeah, collinsiae. Okay, go ahead, Sam.
I'm going to say I have a good example in the collinsiae specimen. I only have this one tersula one. I'm not sure if it shows up there very easily because, you know, as usual, everything's all crowded together in this, but we can see some of the tersula specimens. But the collinsiae specimen that I'll show, you can see, and that's the one that I come across often enough to be very aware of that narrow slot. But and the difficulty is that until you get a little bit of experience or we have better pictures available, a lot of times you start second guessing, like, oh, maybe that is a bare hairless area or not. But anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to collinsiae. But if we're looking at tersula, so the specimen I'll put up here, you know, Mike talks about S2 with hairs erect. So these really are straight up, which maybe is it's the only one I'm aware of that has that. Do you know of any others?
Not to some extent, but not like this. This is unique in the eastern fauna. Yeah.
Okay. So let me flip over to show the specimen now. The hind basetarsal tooth is often, you know, a struggle for people to see. And in this particular specimen, I've got a lot of, which I only have one, sadly. I have a bunch of glue down there. So on the, or it's just, I can't really get in there. So we can actually try and find. So here's the specimen and there's the basotarsus, but I just can't get, because of the pin angle and it's a glued to the pin kind of thing, I can't get in there and look for the spine, which is, you know, tucked into the hair somewhere in there, probably right about there, just to say. But we can see the upright hairs here. And let's see if I want to maybe turn this a little bit more. And I'm going to spin the pin a little bit. And then we'll look at the relatively unusual other character, which is the fact that it has a pretty wide area along the rim that is unpitted. So here is this unusual feature. So you'll just have to take my word for it at the moment. This is the rim of S2, and these hairs normally are pointing towards us. They would be lying flat, sometimes short, sometimes quite long, going well, extending well over the rim, but these are just pointing straight up. And, you know, I hadn't even realized that, but in thinking about it, I couldn't come up with anything else that has hairs doing that same sort of thing.
And this is a real northern species for northern mountains.
Yeah, I think this specimen in here, well, actually, you know, we can see some of these hairs. We'll flip this to see if we can actually see the trough in this specimen, but here's S4. So here you can actually peek under, right? There's not in focus yet, but if we wanted to, we have a little gap and we could look in and maybe see some of the S3 characters, which are not relevant to the couplet here, but just to, again, it's all, a lot of this is orientation thing. So I'm at my highest magnification, but you can see the hair, this hair patch right here. And again, not part of our ID string, and that this is convex, not concave, like in the last one. But here you can see the hairs aren't straight. You know, they're either S-shaped or just bent over at the top. And so this is, I have no idea why these are useful and why the differences are occurring and all at this kind of level to male Osmia, but it's pretty variable. So again, there's just to show that there's these differences in presentation. We can't see S4 from this angle, but before we go, well, we can actually see a little bit already of the wide bare rim along the tergites here. I'll show that in a second, but most species have pitting on the tergites that come almost to the rim. So that's a nice feature. Great. So I have a collinsiae specimen that has this lovely trough. And I just think that, so here's S3. You can kind of even see it a little bit better there, but here's the S4 region, and I'm going to say probably not worth investigating a whole bunch, but there would be, this trough would be going through there, but hard to see.
Something else about collinsiae, and this will be something we'll add to the couplets. Usually those hair in collinsiae, at least all the ones out in the Midwest, the hairs are dark.
Yeah,
they're not light colored. They're blackish.
On the S4, right?
Yeah, on S4. And in the other species, in the key, atriventris and tersula, they're lighter colored.
Yeah, I use that all the time too as a confirmation, particularly if I'm like, am I seeing that narrow trough or not? But I'm like, okay, there's dark hairs, and that's a relatively unusual trait for I'm going to try and get it so shiny here. You can see on the lateral sides here a little bit better, but this is quite a wide, unpitted area for Osmia. And there's a few pits in
Or did you move on to collinsiae?
No, this is still tersula.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just not getting, like, I think it's just very reflective specimen, but this is the ring light. So what happens if I turn it off? Not very good. Anyway, here's this wide gap. I think it's pretty apparent.
That ring light should be dimmable.
Oh, true. Oh my gosh. So many interruptions. Oh, here's the knob. Well, you can kind of see better there. I'll angle it one more time, and then we'll jump down to collinsiae, where we have the dark hairs and trough to look at. I think people get the point, though, that it is that the pits don't go anywhere near to the rim. All right, any more tersula things? Mike, it's just not something I have a whole lot of experience with.
Yep, that's good. That's good.
Okay. All right, so let's flip back to the guide. And so here we are at tersula, and now we're going to go to the collinsiae albiventris. I don't have an albiventris one, but we can talk about it because it does occur regularly. And let me pull the collinsiae specimen I have ready here and take off its tag and get to the sternites and see if we can get a good angle on this. Okay, so just to review, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, this couplet introduces a character T7. I don't think we've talked about much, but it's another one that often is hidden, and T7 is often tucked away under T6 or T5, and so sometimes it's hard to see. But it varies a lot between species, and it's a very useful thing to look at.
Okay, so let's get here and see if we can see those things. That is a bad angle. maybe. This is the problem with, this is why you hold specimens in your hand so that you can angle these things. Yeah, I need to try another angle here. It hopefully can show up on the screen. I was able to see it when I was looking on the microscope. It's just a lot of things going on down there with our friend. Oh, this might work. Okay, so here's Mike. I haven't used this one, but you want to talk about here's S2.
Yeah, the hair patterns and the types of hairs on S2 haven't been used a lot in previous keys to Osmia, but I think they're pretty useful, at least in the East. And collinsiae is kind of cool because it's most of the hairs on S2 are short and oppressed, except along the apical margin, they become dense and very white, and Sam's got a good image here, almost like a fascia. That is a kind of a narrow white patch along the margin, and very few other ones have that.
Yep.
And
that's a good character. I wasn't either.
And S2, fortunately, S2 is almost always visible, so it's never tucked under anything. So it's a good part of the anatomy of male Osmia to note.
Okay, now the S4, which I'm going to have to jack the light up to see, which will blow out everything else, but hopefully will open up this area in here, which I believe we'll be able to see both the dark hairs and this mysterious slot, or what do you call it again, Mike?
That's as good a term as anything. It's just a narrow hairless zone. But one word's always better than three, so it does look like a slot.
A little bit more, maybe. All right, let's go back here. Oof, there's just a lot going on here that can't really see S4 well. But, well, here's, this is, I think, S7, right? Or T7, rather. But we'll change the view on that. I'm trying to see S4 right now. And I was looking at it under the microscope. That was clear. Oof, this is too bright. But the angle here may preclude doing that. And I don't have another male to look at. This is a problem, like we don't have a big collection because we just use things for synoptic and then give everything else away or deposit it in the Smithsonian. But we're building actually a new annex in another old crane chick building to actually have be able to store a long series of things so that in the future we'll be able to show things more accurately. There's just so many, I may not be able to do this well. Let me just try one more angle here. Just a lot of legs in the way. Yeah. Yep. I just don't think that I can get the right shot. So here, this should be T6 and T7 should be under there. Let's see if we can see that a little bit better. This might be a good angle to see the two together. So dark. All right, let's bring up the light. And see.
Yeah, so the emargination you're seeing there is T6.
Yeah.
And that's another useful character sometimes.
So
certain
T7 would be this
That's
area.
right. Yeah.
But
Hard to see.
right. I'll do one more view change on this one before we pass this on. Oof, so bright.
Laurel asks, so the notch rim is T7 or T6?
Well, both T6 and T7 in the group of Osmia we're looking at today, in one way or the other, both are emarginate, but just in different ways.
Yeah.
And usually T6, the emargination is much more subtle and not deep. It's kind of, and sometimes it's hardly there at all. But in T7, some of the species have a very deep, narrow V-shaped emargination and almost spine-like lobes on either side of the emargination. But as Sam is demonstrating, sometimes it's just hard to see unless it's
Right.
pulled out.
So in general though, usually you can get a peek at it with the right angle. But as you see, there's often a lot going on down there. And that angle is not, legs and whatnot. So I think I'm going to stop this process at the moment. Yeah, I just think we've reached the point where I'm not going to get a good shot, so why bother anymore? But we'll look on another specimen and just talk about T7. And in this particular case, it's quite deeply notched in comparison. See, that's the problem, is it's a lot of these great characters are comparative ones, so you have had to have seen additional specimens to appreciate, and it's difficult to describe its characters when you are only looking at one specimen. Let me change this lighting again, which is not letting me do that. Well, we'll go back first to here. So albiventris, I don't have a specimen. My sort of simple-minded thinking of albiventris males is that because S3 is almost always hidden and you don't see a lot of characters, but in albiventris, because it has in the center of S3, which is emarginate, so it's concave, it has a huge amount of hair, but in particularly the central hairs are much longer than normal and often poke out as a little point from underneath S2. What do you think about that?
Yes, but so does the next one, atriventris. It fits that description also, in that there's a little tuft that sometimes, even though S3 gets hidden, you can see enough of it to know that it's one or the other. So
I have relatively little. I'll show you a couple characters in atriventris that I use, and you can let me know, because I really have that much experience with albiventris, whether it's useful or not. But so we'll skip and go down to atriventris right now. So atriventris for me here in the East is probably the number 2 of the natives. So right now, Taurus and cornifrons are often the number one. But of the natives, I'm either looking at pumila or atriventris as the most common species in general in any area. Like they show up all the time. Is that true in Missouri?
Yeah, it's much that way in the greater Midwest as well. Those are two very common species in all kinds of habitats.
Yep. All right, so when we're going to go to look here. So we'll look at you even mentioned the peak tuff. Okay, so that's not been on my radar screen. So we have these because often I just can't see S3 sufficiently. So S2, very short, that's something I use, particularly because sometimes I can't see the T1, the face that is what would that be called? I'm disoriented right now in terms of up and down.
The anterior face of T1.
Anterior face, if the specimen is has the abdomen cocked up, which people who spread their specimens almost always do. So if you're like us and it's just the abdomen sags down, that's actually a bonus when dealing with Osmia males, because now you can see a propodial pit, which we'll talk about in show, and the face of that anterior face. And basically on the interior face, you're looking, is it shiny, like a mirror, or is it crisscrossed and dull by many small microscopic lines? So if you can't see that, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, am I looking at pumila? And the hairs, though, let me get this under the specimen, on S2 really discriminate those two very nicely in the scheme of things. And then my run is to look at shiny face on T1, that interior face being shiny, and then also the propodial pit area being very large, with sort of big shiny areas. We'll show it. This specimen, I think, shows it very well. And then this area on S4 having relatively long white hairs. So I'm going to let Mike. So here's the S2 rim. It has, in the scheme of things, remember what we were looking at there in collinsiae. Why am I getting some weird parallax here? In collinsiae, this had much longer hairs. And why is it doing that strange? Like it's got two pieces of the, I'm just playing with the camera here.
Sam, do you have atriventris or albiventris up?
No, this is atriventris.
Okay, that's what I thought. I wanted to say before.
Just wondering why I feel like something is out of alignment.
Yeah, there's like a fisheye kind of effect happening.
Yeah, I don't know that I've hit anything, but I think we can see what's going on. So here's the rim, very nicely convex, and here's the relatively short hairs trimmed right to there. And Mike, what else do you want us to look at here now that we have?
Well, you mentioned those long hairs on the apical margin of S4,
Yep.
which are almost always visible, and S3 is completely hidden, so we can't see that little tuft.
Yeah.
But you don't need to in this case, because you can see enough other stuff. So if this were pumila, and you were looking at S2, the hairs would be very, very much longer. I mean, there would be no doubt about it.
And the atriventris, as you can kind of see here, tends to move a little more. Those hairs tend to be less white, so either an off-white or a slightly burnt umber-ish presentation. Yeah. And in pumila, it's bright, and often atriventris tends to be blue, I think maybe almost always is blue, and Pumala mostly is a green blue, I would call it, in terms of the integument. But you know, that can be pretty variable. All right, so let's take a look on the upper side. So
does the T1 shiny or dull surface character in females work for males as well?
yeah, that's what we're talking about. And that's in the Discover Life guide. So it's a different path, right? Remember, in Discover Life, you're just looking at different combinations of characters for everything. Whereas in this traditional approach of a dichotomous key, you're always confronted by pairs of characters. So here we see this area is the anterior face of T1, as Mike mentioned, very shiny. I'm going to bring down the lighting a little bit. So very shiny, unlike Pumala. And we'll take a look at the propodial pit, which is on the propodium over here in a second. It's not showing well at this point, but also note the relatively narrow pitting or bare area on the rims of the tergites. Again, we have a very shiny specimen, but you can see that in comparison to the last one, the pits aren't going all the way to the rim, but this is a relatively narrow bare area along the edge. Collinsiae often has a moderately wide one, not as wide as that tersula specimen. And when you're doing your comparisons, this is another place to look. Is usually the pit density is about the same in all of them, but the distance, this gap is often a really good character. Let's see if we can see the propodial pit area. And this is, the propodial pit is also a, I doubt we have time today, but when we look at Pumala, which is again, this very, very common species, Droege can look an awful lot like it too, but it has an extremely different propodial pit. Something that leaps out here for atriventris. So here's the rear face of the propodium. Here is a propodial pit. And like Droege, for example, it is a very narrow slot, like you can't even see to the interior of it. And in atriventris, this is probably about the largest propodial pit area that I know. You have this big oval area, very shiny interior, and there's a sort of two wings, smaller egg-shaped areas to either side. But that extensive amount one, you know, also tells me I'm probably looking at atriventris, and then I look under S3 for confirmation and that these other patterns are largely the same. Mike, do you use propodial pit very much?
I do. Yeah. And that's something that the next version of the key, I'll incorporate some of those characters.
Yeah.
So.
What are we doing for time, Claire?
It's about 1 o'clock almost.
Okay, that might be this might.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 o'clock.
I was gonna say I'd hesitate starting anything new because I'm gonna have to wrap us up.
Okay, and I think, you know, one of the things I'm thinking, Mike, and other people can chime in if they like, is that we have species pages for all these things, for all the species, that what I might do is take the last couplet for all the species in your dichotomous keys and just place the couplet into the words of the species page, where we have often the original descriptions and subsequent revisions that describe the species. But I think that often the most important characters for discriminating that species are in your couplets. And so if that's okay with you, we might.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Put the nail, because you're still working on that.
I like that idea.
A lot. And then we could then retroactively go back through other people's keys and do similar things. I think that might be a useful addition.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, any questions from anybody? Or Mike, do you have other things to point out here?
Well, that's good. Let's save Pumala for next time, because that's
Yeah.
that's one to look at in great detail.
Yep. Yeah, and then we might have a little time for, yeah, I've got Virga.
Chordata.
Sorry, what was the last one?
Chordata.
Yeah, I think I have a specimen of, yeah, actually I have one that I have as chordata or clarescens. I wasn't sure. It's from South Dakota. So we can see if it matches. And then we have the Inurbana pictures that Joan was able to provide. So I think we have a great deal. We'll occupy a bunch of another whole session with just those. And yeah, that'll do it.
Okay.
Any other questions out there, Claire or anybody?
No. Thank you, everybody. Do you have anything? Unmute real quick. If not, I'll shut us down. All right, go team.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
Claire.
Thanks,
Sam.
everyone. Okay. Bye now.